Hi everyone. Um, my name is Tucker Daddis, and I'm an intern here at the Mercer University Macon Counseling and Psychological Service Office. Um, so I'm going to be hosting Wellness Wednesday today, and today's topic is the media's glorification of alcohol and substance use. And really, what we're going to kind of be exploring in today's Wellness Wednesday is how the media's portrayal of alcohol and substance use disorders might actually be influencing our perceptions, thoughts, behaviors, and emotions regarding the use of alcohol and substance. So just a little bit of background about me before we really get started. So I graduated from Colgate University in upstate New York in 2013 with a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology with a minor in Biology. And that really reflects a large portion of kind of my theoretical background in terms of, understanding psychology, as personally, I believe we can't truly understand psychology without first understanding the underlying, physiological and body structures that support these thoughts, emotions, behaviors, etc. So after graduating Colgate, I spent a couple years in the education sector, actually working as an educator in a middle and high school in New York. And here I worked a whole bunch of different roles, really. Working as a tutor, a peer mentor, even an in-house substitute teacher. I also spent this time after school working in a couple different organizations providing food and shelter for homeless communities in the Rochester, New York area. So besides contributing to those main goals, during these meals and such, I would be working with a lot of these individuals actually regarding their substance use behaviors and their goals. And so as I'll kind of talk about shortly, I think it's kind of clear that alcohol and substance use disorders are actually a pretty big interest of mine. And they're definitely represented in both my clinical and research interests. But anyway, so after taking some time to gain a little bit more experience and understanding in the field, I applied to graduate school. And specifically Mercer University's Atlanta-based Doctor of Psychology program, or otherwise known as a PsyD. And that's where I currently attend, and I'm actually starting my third year there. Just an awesome little bit of news. Just recently I passed my written competency exams, basically marking almost the halfway point of the program, if you will, and that halfway step comes with the attainment of your Master's of Science in Psychology, which is a cool little piece. But anyways, so I'm currently working here at the Macon Caps, providing, as a practicum intern, providing individual counseling under the direct supervision of Dr. Emily Piasek, who many of you probably know is the head of Caps here. And so, as we were kind of touching on a little bit earlier, I have some pretty special interests in the areas of alcohol and substance use disorders, both research and clinically wise. And just this past year, I was actually fortunate enough to be able to co-publish a paper with one of my professors on the topic that we're about to dive into shortly. But enough about me. So let's kind of dive into the topic, so to speak. Being that of glorification of alcohol and substance use in today's media, and how it might affect our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. So really, kind of on the surface, that most people might not really think about, or at least consciously think about how that may actually be a real pattern that's, evolving in today's modern society. But it's interesting to hear that a variety of different factors have been documented as contributing to the development of alcohol and substance use behaviors. So, for example, some research out there suggests things such as, perceived availability of substances, family history of use, personal attitudes, favorable towards drug use. All of these things have strong correlations to the development of these use behaviors in young adults, not unlike college-age adults. So, on a very much related note, it's no secret that today's generations of youth and young adults are the largest consumers of media in all forms, be it, social media, digital media, music, TV, etc. modern day media has had documented effects of being able to influence young adults' thoughts and behaviors. And so let's a very thoroughly researched example being that of how media can create unrealistic values and expectations with respect to body image. I think it's no secret to many that a lot of different values and things communicated through media can have very negative and unrealistic effects on body image expectations and such, especially in female populations. So kind of based on this, it would be logical to assume that media's common portrayal of alcohol and substance use in romanticizing and glorifying ways. So in other words, media showing alcohol and substance use in a, quote, cool or positive way, it's likely that could have a similar effect, right? So in thinking that, I immediately then think to how common and popular these types of media are in today's age. And I have to admit I am not innocent of having never consumed some of these things. Some of my favorite movies or TV shows, The Hangover, great movie, or one of my personal favorite TV shows, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, often showing substance use and kind of almost glorifying or romanticizing it, showing it in the funny, lighthearted portrayal ways. I mean, these shows are hilarious and they're fun to watch, right? I mean, there's a reason that they're so rated so highly and so popular. And as I bring up these two examples, and these are just two personal examples for me. There are a sea of hundreds of others that could be accessed and referenced. And I think I bring these examples up specifically just because I think they're pretty good examples of where the use is glorified, right? And kind of how I was talking about, it's showing the positive sides, the happy things, the funny things. And while some of these characters may go through some trials and tribulations because of their use patterns and stuff for the plot, ultimately, almost always, it always works out for them, right? There's never really any real consequences, so to speak. And unfortunately, they just don't do as good of a job at demonstrating the possibility and likelihood of these negative consequences. So for a relatable example of some of these more negative consequences of use, for example, a 2019 study polling some Mercer undergrad students actually found that in 2019, within that past year, 26.2% of respondents had done something they later regretted, 24.3% had been criticized by others they've known, and 25.1% had experienced memory loss within the past year as a result of drinking or drug use. And so, kind of tying it back to what we were talking about previously, oftentimes these media sources are just not portraying that side of use. It's really more so the funny, the happy, the things that are going to gain viewership and what make us want to watch these shows. And so kind of just summarizing, instead of highlighting the negative outcomes, we're really highlighting the positive outcomes, the positive memories and emotions associated with these alcohol and substance use. So following the recent explosion of technological development, and as television and modern media has really started to become more accessible to the average family over the past, realistically 2 decades, scientists have begun to explore this possible pattern a lot more closely and in depth. And as it turns out, there's actually quite a large amount of evidence suggesting that this same type of pattern that we observed in respect to media and body image trends is actually also occurring with respect to media and substance use behaviors. So in 1997, actually, a group of psychologists discovered in a sample of 224 college students, not unlike the Mercer body, that, so in these college students, those who were exposed to media portraying alcohol consumption without the associated negative consequences, and here they're giving the examples of things like hangovers, social consequences of heavy use, damaging relationships, things like that, etc. So those who were portrayed alcohol consumption without these negative consequences were far less, or developed far more favorable attitudes to actual use than those who viewed the same media without those with those consequences involved. So, let me summarize that real quick just because I stumbled on some words there. Basically, in 1997, a group of psychologists discovered that in a college sample, those who watched media portraying alcohol with these positive effects, the funny things, and without the associated negative consequences, were actually far more likely to have favorable attitudes towards use themselves versus those who viewed that same media with the consequences included. And kind of as I touched on a little bit there, using some similar methods, the same group of psychologists also found that positive portrayals of alcohol use seem to increase favorable attitudes towards use in college students as well. So almost kind of thinking back to that Always Sunny example, I'm sure many students who have seen that show or big fans of it can think of, Charlie McDennis, The Game of Games, showing the fun, happy use and such like that, but not showing the more long-term negative, really impactful negative outcomes. And so these trends kind of make sense in an almost obvious sense if you stop to think about it in relation to some of the things we've discussed earlier. Once again, the body image patterns and things like that. So I think an important specific takeaway from these two studies here is that quote, "The greater the role attractiveness of the drinking character, the more favorable the viewer's attitude toward drinking and the more potent his or her behavioral dispositions to drink alcohol." So that's really almost academic sounding, right? What does this really mean in just brass tacks? What this means is that the more we really like and engage with characters, for instance, I really enjoyed Charlie on Always Sunny. He's one of my favorite characters. I find him hilarious. I find it cool that he's actually the guy who writes the show or writes a lot of the episodes, and I just really engage with his character a lot. So for my example, it would be more likely every time he displays some of these use behaviors that it's more likely for me to engage and have that kind of impact and impress on me as well. And so what's also important to note is that this is actually a well-documented trend that's been observed in all sorts of different media contexts like TV shows and movie characters, etc. And it's also appearing that this trend isn't just evident in TV shows and movies, but it may even be in music as well. So over the past 2 decades, some researchers have found that reference to substance uses are significantly and sharply increasing within the music genre. Evidence shows that these references are usually framed in, once again, a positive, glorifying, or romanticizing way. And they're usually more so highlighting the positive emotions that are accompanying alcohol and drug use. I think it's pretty easy for the average student to think of some examples of music and songs they might hear doing exactly that while out at a club or party on the weekend or something like that, or even just driving around on the radio. It's also worth noting that this trend of media influence in terms of substance use behaviors and such isn't just documented in Western university student populations where often these studies are conducted, and rather it's actually a team of scientists and psychologists all across the world have compiled evidence suggesting that this is in fact probably a global trend. So with that all being said, it all comes down to one real question, right? The question is, what is the ultimate takeaway of this message? What can you as students use from all this information in your actual day-to-day life to have a good and positive impact? I know on the surface, it might seem, based on all the research I just presented, that my takeaway message would be to reject all these popular TV shows and movies and songs and albums, etc., right? But let's be honest, that's just both flat out unsustainable and unrealistic. Replacing Future with Beethoven at Friday night's party, for example, just isn't very likely for the average college student. And I don't see that being reflected in many of their playlists either. With that being said, we're not just going to completely change all of our interests, right? Because that's not staying true and genuine to who we are. We like these certain genres and, types of music, etc. We don't want to just cancel all that out, right? Because returning back to what I just said, that's not sustainable. So with all this being said, what we can do is we can just simply be mindful of the types of media that we're consuming, right? And really more so, we can be mindful of the messages and the underlying values that they might be communicating regarding alcohol and substance use. And then finally, sometimes it's helpful just to pause, take a second, and step back a little bit and kind of examine maybe even their possible effect on your own values and perceptions, and possibly even behaviors. Sometimes taking this time to actually step back to critically examine something can be extremely helpful for us and actually provide worlds of insight in situations that we would have never possibly discovered. And furthermore, as you continue your college career, you can really begin to carve out your own identity as an individual. You can really just keep in mind, and kind of be mindful of what your values are regarding substance use and consumption and things like that, versus what the media and the types of music and things and TV shows, etc., what those values are communicating. And it's just kind of important to make sure that what you're consuming and what you actually believe in are hopefully a little bit parallel. And, if they're not to catastrophize it and make it the end of the world, we have to change all of our, various different pastimes and things to watch and consume, etc. But just be mindful of it, and just kind of be wary and understand that the effect that these things can have. So, with that being said, I want to thank everybody for taking their time to, listen to our Wellness Wednesday talk. I hope that it was at least beneficial in some way for you and maybe might even help contribute to some healthier understandings. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, the CAPS office is available to help. Let's see, do we have any questions? I guess I'll wait a couple of seconds here. Do we have any questions from the crowd? Doesn't seem so. In that case, then, I'd like to thank everybody once again for taking their time to listen to me talk. And I hope that you have a great day. Have a good one.